Hello, everybody. Jan Rutherford here with Self-Reliant Leadership. Hope you're doing great. If you've been watching these office hours in LinkedIn Live over the past few months, you've noticed that we've been covering a chapter every week from this book, Becoming a Self-Reliant Leader, How Grit and Disciplined Duty Forge Indomitable Teams, a book I wrote with Jackie Jordan. It just launched last week, and this is the final session. And I just thought I'd try to put a bow on everything that we've done. And if you're listening later, not live, this will be on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. And if you are listening live, I would love to hear where you're listening from. And as I go through everything, if you've got any questions at all, I would love to hear what those questions might be. So just drop them in the chat. That would be fantastic. So I'm going to say about 20 minutes or so and just kind of cover what I think is the essence of this book and why we put it together. And it's always interesting that people say, hey, why'd you write this book? and, and I go back to when I was a young soldier, a young Green Beret weighing 114 pounds. Um, what I remember most about my time in the Army was a lot of times being cold, wet, tired, and miserable. And I remember the fact that if you look at all those people I'm standing in line with, what got me through the training was I didn't want to let anyone down. And no matter of your size, your physical stature, how tired or hungry or cold you were, you had to carry the same amount of weight. You had to carry and do your duty. And I think about the business world a lot of times, that analogy of what it means to carry your own weight. If somebody's going on leave, somebody's got to make up for it. If somebody's got COVID, somebody's got to make up for it. If somebody has a migraine, somebody's got to make up for it. If somebody decides, hey, I'm going to take a sick day for vacation, somebody's got to make up for it. And what I remember most when you're physically connected to people is you just didn't want to let anyone down. And so you had to be squared away. You had to be self-reliant to be reliable. And that's really a big thing that I remember most. And if I really go back to my boyhood, I read this book, oh gosh, half a dozen times. And to show how bright I was, I actually thought this was a true story. It's called My Side of the Mountain. It's about a little boy, 13 years old, named Sam Gribley. And he convinces his parents that he can go out in the Catskill Mountains and live by himself. And he goes out there and he burns out the bottom of a big tree, and he lives in there, and he teaches a falcon how to hunt for him for food. And then after a year, he brings his whole family out and he shows them how self-reliant he is. And now, not only is he self-reliant, he can take care of his family. He can feed them. He can shelter them. And to me, it was just, as a little kid, it just was really profound. And I remember that I wanted to be that kid. I wanted to live out in the middle of nowhere in the Everglades, and my parents wouldn't let me. But I really felt like I don't want to be the weak link. I want to be able to take care of myself. So that was really the basis of this whole book. And what a self-reliant leader is really is they lead themselves. They have that sense of duty, that personal responsibility, that sense of ownership, to be gritty, to persevere, to be tenacious, to be curious. And with that, they lead others. They not only are self-reliant, they are reliable. And they lead others from the front by saying, hey, follow me. I'm going to lead by example. I'm not going to ask you to do anything I wouldn't do myself. But they're also going to lead from the back, where they empower people, that they let people make mistakes, that they trust people, that they don't have this sense that I have to control everything and micromanage. And lastly, and this is the hardest thing to do as leaders, is really move to the executive level and to lead the organization, which really means to design an environment where great things happen, to think about the culture, how it feels to work in and that team in that organization. So I'll pause right there. And again, any questions or comments, please put them in LinkedIn. And again, if you are listening live, I'd love to know where you're listening from. That would be great. So that's what a self-reliant leader is. And I cheated a little bit. I asked ChatGPT, I put in the definition of self-reliant leader, and I asked ChatGPT, who are self-reliant leaders? And it's interesting. Here's what it came up with. Nelson Mandela, resilience and determination. Angela Merkel, the former prime minister of Germany. Winston Churchill, resilience. Abraham Lincoln, Mahatma Gandhi, Margaret Thatcher, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Malala Yousafzai, and General Mattis. It was interesting. Some of these people are still alive, and most of them have passed. But I bolded the words in here that I thought really personified the self-discipline, the resilience, courage, determination. All those words really typify a self-reliant leader. And if you look at this list also, Mandela, Gandhi, no direct reports. Ginsburg was a Supreme Court justice, but really no direct reports. Malala, no direct reports. So half of these people had no legitimate authority, but they had broad influence over others based on their passion, their vision, their ability to influence and inspire. I thought that was interesting. And again, if you looked at any of those people, you'd say, well, they were self-reliant. They were squared away. They spent the time figuring out who they were, and that attracted people to them. So kind of interesting. And what I want to do is really cover 4 areas, if you will. Select, expect, develop, and affect. And this really goes back to the book. And it's based on 25 crucible expeditions we've led over the past 10 years with executives paired with military veterans transitioning out. So these 4 areas, if I think about the crucible, the first one is to select the right people. And you can see this little cliff here. And there's been times when, of course, this is scary to cross this thing. But there's been times when people, it wasn't even physical, and it wasn't even fear of heights. It was attitude, that we had people that weren't, we didn't have the right people there. So we came up with 3 criteria by which we select people for the crucible. 1, they have to be selfless, put others first. They have to be adventurous. In other words, willing to be bold, take risks, not just physically, but with their own humility and vulnerability. And we want to be around people that have heroic aspirations, that are ambitious, that want to make the world a better place, that understand that a good life is lived in the service of others. So that's what we try to select for. And a lot of the companies that I work with sometimes aren't real clear about the selection criteria. They may have lofty goals and values over here, but they haven't made a connection between those values and observable behaviors by which they can select, develop, and nourish people in their organization. And to give you a sense of that little cliff, I've got a little video of it so you can kind of get a sense in real time what it looked like. So there's a difference in perceived risk and real risk. The perceived risk on this little thing is enormous. The real risk, if you were walking across it, if you just look straight, you could see, hey, this is totally walkable and doable. But the perceived risk is certainly great. And that really relates oftentimes to a discussion about the work world. Out here, it's easy to see risk. In the work world, we ask people to do things. It's not always so evident. So the next one I wanted to mention was the expectations. Now, this is a great participant we had that suffered from quite a bit of altitude sickness, and here she is doing a headstand on a 13,000-foot mountain. in July of last year, and she just did a wonderful job. But part of the expectation that we set was, hey, this is going to be hard. There are going to be times that you've got to dig deep, and you are going to make it. And we were very, very clear about the expectation settings. And I wanted to show a video about this that hopefully will make this point better than I can right now with some graphic. Self-reliant coaching, leading others, is all about setting expectations. That's where we gain true commitment, so that you can ensure what your intent is actually what gets done. Now, we talk a lot about accountability, and there's nothing wrong with that. My argument here is we should be spending a lot more time talking about expectations. And not just talking, but listening, and really making sure that that's what's understood. And I want you to think of an analogy of two buckets. One is shiny, and it's called the future bucket. And one is sort of a rusty old pail, and it's called the past bucket. The future bucket is where we set expectations. We describe our intent, and we gain commitment. The old rusty past bucket is all about accountability. Did you do what you said you were going to do? If you're really good about expectation setting, you should need to spend very little time on the accountability, because in reality, the accountability quickly, after we learn the lesson, turns into reframing, resetting, recalibrating the expectations. So think of it this way. When we ask somebody to do something, we provide direction. We're wanting them to engage their hands, to do something, to produce an outcome. But real leaders engage the head and the heart, so that when people are doing something with their hands, they're completely committed. They truly understand. The part that's sketchy, based on what you said today, definitely sketchier what we're going to do tomorrow than today. There's not like a knife edge, but there's a part where you have to scramble up a little bit, and if you get a little freaked out by heights, there's a place where you're going to have somebody, kind of helping you. And I mean, there's a little bit of a scramble, and that means you're using your hands, not just your feet. So it's a pretty short section, but if you've never done it before, it could be a little bit like, oh, there's a pucker factor there. So it's really important that you make sure the communication sent is exactly the same as the communication received. And that means slowing down to speed up. That means slowing down to have these conversations and not making assumptions about what's understood. So as you think about leading others, think about accountability, of course, but think about spending much more time setting expectations and making sure your intent is clearly understood. Some great scenery in there, and a lot of that was filmed in the Wallowa Mountains of Oregon. Some of it was in Colorado. So to kind of wrap that up, if you think about this, it really is being clear about the expectations, but not only the results expected, but the behaviors. And oftentimes I hear people talk about performance only being results. To me, performance is both the results and the behaviors. The second thing is really making sure that the person understands exactly where they stand with you, whether you're meeting, not meeting, or exceeding expectations, to have that conversation and let people know. And again, part of the job of a leader is to be a judge. You have to judge performance. That's part of the job. And the last thing that I see left out so often is that the consequences aren't understood. By that, I mean, if you don't produce results and behaviors perform, what happens to the team, the organization? What's the downstream effect of you not performing? What's the downstream effect if you exceed expectations? How does that benefit other people? And the ultimate consequence is, hey, if you're not doing your job, we're going to have a tough conversation. And those oftentimes are avoided. And that does no one a favor when those tough conversations are avoided. So that's really critical. And if you think about it, I think about it real simply in the context of really the head, hands, and heart. And that is that the direction we're going to go up to the top of that mountain is really about the head. We want what we want people to think and know, understand. The pace, what we're going to do with our hands and our feet. Well, going up a mountain, we're going to go as fast as the slowest person. In the work world, the direction is usually hit a number by the end of the month or by the end of the quarter. That's usually the direction. But what we hardly ever think about is, how do I want people to feel when they're being led by me? That normally gets the short shrift of things. And it's so important that we are understanding that people need to be engaged and appreciated and inspired. And that goes back to developing people. Um, there was a time right about in this place on this picture where somebody said, "Hey, I'm afraid. I think we need to find an alternative route." And I said on Crucibles, "Hey, if there's ever a time you don't feel safe, say something." Well, this person did, and I said, "That's fine. You perceive the risk, greater than it probably is, but that's your perception." I said, "Hey, before we turn around and go down, are there times when you ask people at work to do things that they don't feel qualified? They feel afraid. They feel like if they fail, something bad's going to happen. Are you considering how people feel when you're leading them?" And it was a really great aha. And we got down to the bottom and we made an alternate route. And I said to this person, how do you feel? And I was afraid they were going to feel bad that they changed the trip for everybody. And they said, "I feel great." And what I realized in that moment was this person was so confident that they could be vulnerable. And when they were vulnerable, it improved their confidence. And I thought it was really interesting that when you're really secure in who you are and what you stand for, you can stand up to things and you can be vulnerable and not appear weak. And a lot of times people think being vulnerable is showing weakness. And in this case, that is not what I saw at all. But it was a really great lesson about how we want people to feel when we're being led. If we get up to the top of a summit and we've stretched everybody so much that they're about to break, they're not going to go to the next higher ground. They might mutiny. Well, think about what we ask people to do. We ask them to hit a number every month or every quarter. Well, if they feel good at the end of the quarter, then they're going to know, hey, we've got another goal coming. But if they feel demoralized, like they've just, been micromanaged or just, criticized the whole time because they were falling behind, they're not going to be in any shape of mind to basically go forward, willingly. So I think that's a really important thing to think about. And oftentimes, and this is borrowed from Chris Warner, a great climber in his own right, great entrepreneur. And this is a great matrix to really look at that performance. On one axis, it's the results, the x-axis, and that is the numbers. And on the y-axis, it really is the alignment of core values or the observable behaviors. Combined, it equals performance. The green really represents your stars. They're behaving the right way, they're producing results. But oftentimes, we don't spend enough time here. Somebody's core values are great, they're a great person, they're not hitting their numbers. Or over here, we have somebody hitting their numbers, but they're hard on the help. They're a cancer in the organization. Well, it's up to the leader to basically move people up or out. We have to let people know where they stand. We have to let people know the consequences of being a jerk, the consequences of not producing. We have to let people know that is our job. So, one of the things that I remember on this Sacagawea Crucible, we had a big group, 17 people, and it really was about the effect, about the tone. And what we did is we had divided the group into two groups and said, "Hey, go up to the top of the mountain." We didn't give them any guidance at all. There's no trail. So one group took a very safe route that was going to be longer and slower. The other group basically took the ridge. It was direct, but there was exposure on both sides of the ridge. Well, the person that took the slow route had talked to everybody and said, "Hey, what are your fears?" And people said, "I don't like the loose rock. I want to go slow." And they were laughing and joking along the way. The other group got to a point where they were petrified. Some of the groups stopped moving because they were afraid because of the exposure, the elevation. And at one point, it looked like the group on the ridge was going to go to the top fastest. And what happened? Both groups got to the top at the same time. But here's the interesting thing: is the group that went slow. If you asked them to do another mountain, they would have said, "Heck yeah." The group that had been scared, they would have said, "No way. I don't trust the leaders." They did not pay attention to my fears, the perceived risk, or anything like that. So it's really important that, every situation calls for a different type of leadership. In some ways, you could say, "Hey, I want to stretch my team and see what they're made of." That's what the one group did. On the other hand, the other group basically took a safe route, and they know, hey, we're this isn't a sprint. This isn't a sufferfest. This is a marathon. And to me, that replicates the business world a little bit more. Is, we're in a marathon. We're in an ultra marathon. We're going to keep asking people to do things more and more. And we've got to be very mindful all along the way. Do we have them on board to do that? And this is Dan Morostica. He was on one of our sessions just recently. He was a participant on that mountain. And Dan, to this day, has a whiteboard in his office that highlights all his takeaways from that trip. And at the very top up here was, people support what they help create. And to me, that is one of the most important lessons that I could convey, and it comes from one of my mentors. And it was all about the fact that if you tell people what to do, um, they will comply. If you ask for their input, even if it's a little bit, you've got a lot better chance at getting commitment from people, their head, their hands, and their heart. So that I think is absolutely critical. And this really boils down to what we've done in the book is really tried to say, hey, here's what it means to lead yourself. It's about taking personal ownership. It's about demonstrating grit. And when it comes to leading others, it's about really being crystal clear with regard to expectations and creating a sense of duty with those you work with. And the last thing is leading the organization, which is really about alignment and focus. And these days, I'm hearing a lot of things about, change, transformation, resilience. Well, I don't know about you, but a lot of us are sick of those words. you know, I think the word is adapt. If we get cold, we put a coat on. We adapt. We don't get cold and grow fur and change. you know, we adapt. So we're not asking people to change. We're asking them to adapt. We're asking people to collaborate. We're asking people to work together and to take personal responsibility for the greater good. All reasonable things. So the way that we set this book up is we have each of the chapters that basically take you through what happens on a crucible, from selection to expectation setting to the first meeting, the first movement, the first obstacle, the first fireside chat, all of that. And what we do is we tell a story and we relate that to the business world. And at the end of each chapter, we describe how that relates to leading yourself, leading others, and leading the organization. And so with that, and the book's right down there, and we would love it if you would purchase a copy for yourself and for an aspiring leader that you work with, because that's who we wrote it for. This book, was really a labor of love that was the result of basically 4 years of work, 10 years of expeditions. And the reason we wrote it is not everybody can go on an expedition. We can't scale the crucible experience so we could take thousands of people out every year. But what we tried to do in this book is really take you there and really help you understand that when you challenge yourself, whether it's through a crucible that is is your creation, or a crucible, a challenge, a problem that you encounter, that when you embrace it and influence and inspire others, that you change not only your narrative but that for the team. So, with that, I will conclude. And again, I thank you for watching. I hope you got something out of this. And for those of you that are watching, we have three things that we can provide at no charge. All you have to do is ask. One, if you'd like a workbook to accompany the book, just send me a note. Go to my website, selfreliantleadership.com, and ask me. We also have a team assessment, and we also have an artificial intelligence database based on the leadership podcast, and the 400 plus interviews we've done with people from all over the world. So we've got all those things for you. And again, I appreciate it, and good luck on becoming your own self-reliant leader.